They say a lie can outrun truth for a mile, but not forever. By sunrise, the whole town of Dry Creek had gathered to watch a woman fall through a trapdoor. Elena Red Hawk stood on the rough wooden platform with her hands bound, chin lifted, eyes steady as desert stone. The rope around her neck swayed in the morning wind. Men who had never spoken to her shouted that she was a murderer. Women who had never met her whispered that justice had finally come. Even children stood on barrels to see better. Dust rolled across Main Street in thin sheets, catching the first light like smoke. Sheriff Doyle Kane kept wiping his palms on his coat. He looked at the lever beside him the way a weak man looks at responsibility. "Read the charges," someone yelled. His voice shook as he unfolded the paper. Theft. Murder. Conspiracy. Big words used by small people. Elena said nothing. She only looked toward the far road beyond town, where the earth met the sky in a pale red line. As if waiting for something no one else could see. Vernon Holloway stood closest to the platform, polished boots, silver watch chain, smile too quick to be honest. He raised both hands and called for order like a preacher who owned no Bible. "The law has spoken," he said. "Let this be a lesson." Yet his eyes never met Elena's. They kept drifting toward the edge of town. Toward the road. Sheriff Kane reached for the lever. The crowd leaned forward as one body. A dog barked once, then went silent. Wind pressed through the hanging sign of the saloon with a lonely creak. Then hoofbeats came from the distance. Slow at first. Then certain. Every head turned. A rider emerged from the dust, black horse, trail coat faded by 100 storms, hat low over his brow. He did not hurry. Men who hurry often fear being late. This man rode like time could wait for him. He stopped 20 feet from the gallows and looked up at Elena. She did not smile, but something in her eyes changed. Sheriff Kane swallowed hard. "State your business," Vernon snapped. The rider dismounted without answering. His boots hit the dirt with the sound of a door closing. He walked forward, one hand holding something small that glinted in the sun. A broken silver coin. Elena's hand moved to the chain at her neck. Half a coin rested there. Murmurs moved through the crowd like dry grass in wind. The stranger finally lifted his gaze. Gray eyes. Calm eyes. Dangerous only to dishonest men. "My business," he said, voice low and clear, "is promises." Vernon laughed too fast. "You can't stop the law." The cowboy turned slightly. "Funny thing," he said. "Neither can you." He looked at the sheriff. "Drop that lever and you'll hang the only innocent soul in this town." No one moved. No one breathed. Caleb Mercer stepped closer to the platform and held up the matching half coin for all to see. "5 years ago," he said, "this woman saved my life in the high country." He pointed slowly toward Vernon Holloway. "And if you want justice this morning, check the cuffs on the man shouting loudest." Silence can be louder than a gunshot when guilt is standing in public. Vernon Holloway did not move at first. He only smiled the way men smile when they think money can answer any accusation. Then Caleb Mercer stepped closer and pointed at the banker's sleeves. Dark smudges marked the fine fabric near both cuffs, almost hidden beneath the dust of mourning. Sheriff Doyle Kane frowned. "What is that?" he asked. Vernon brushed at the stains too quickly. "Road dirt," he said. "Nothing more." Caleb shook his head once. "Vault ink," he replied. "Same kind the Dry Creek Bank uses on ledger seals. Hard to wash off. Harder to explain before breakfast." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Men who had shouted moments ago now looked at one another instead of the gallows. A woman in the front lowered the stone she had been holding. Sheriff Kane climbed down from the platform and stared at Vernon's sleeves as if seeing the man clearly for the first time. "You were at the bank last night?" Vernon laughed again, but the sound had cracks in it now. I own half the notes in this town. I can go where I please. Caleb nodded. True enough. But the dead man was found behind the bank office, and the safe was open. Strange thing for a grieving citizen to forget mentioning. Elena stood above them, rope loose around her shoulders now, watching everything. With the patience of someone who had learned long ago that truth often walks slower than lies. Wind moved a strand of her dark hair across her cheek. She did not brush it away. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, worn at the edges. Found this 10 miles east on the canyon road, he said. Dropped from a saddlebag in a hurry. He handed it to the sheriff. Kane opened it with clumsy fingers. Inside was a debt ledger bearing Vernon Holloway's name 3 times, each line larger than the last. Gasps rose from the crowd. Dry Creek was a place where many men feared debt more than storms. Looks like our respectable banker owed the victim enough money to lose sleep, Caleb said. Vernon's face tightened. That proves nothing. No, Caleb answered softly. But this might. He crouched in the dirt and lifted one polished boot print beside Vernon's feet. Then he pointed toward the steps of the gallows where the same narrow heel mark had pressed deep into the wood before sunrise. You were first here this morning, Caleb said. Earlier than the sheriff. Earlier than the preacher. Earlier than any man who only came to watch. Sheriff Kane looked up sharply. How would you know that? Caleb met his eyes. Because I arrived before dawn and watched from the ridge. I wanted to see who feared daylight. The town square went still again. Vernon took one step back. Then another. No one opened a path for him. The same people who had crowded forward to watch Elena hang now formed a wall without meaning to. Fear changes sides quickly. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm as river water. Tell them what you asked me last night. Vernon stared at her. Tell them, she repeated. He swallowed hard. Caleb looked from one face to another. Seems our morning is not finished yet. Truth does not rush, but once it arrives, men begin to sweat. Vernon Holloway looked up at Elena on the platform and found no fear in her face, only memory. He tugged at his collar as though the morning heat had suddenly grown heavier. She lies, he said. She always has. Elena tilted her head slightly. Last night you came to my room behind the mercantile, she said, each word clean and steady. You offered me $50 and a train ticket west if I would leave town before dawn. A ripple moved through the crowd. $50 was more money than many men saw in a season. Vernon forced a laugh. Why would I pay you to leave? Elena answered without haste. Because I saw you carrying the safe ledger after midnight. Sheriff Doyle Kane's jaw tightened. You told me she was found near the alley with stolen papers. Vernon turned toward him too fast. That is what I was told. Caleb Mercer folded his arms. By whom? Vernon opened his mouth, then closed it again. Dust skated across the street in thin curls. Somewhere a screen door banged once, then settled. Small sounds become large when no one wants to speak. Caleb stepped toward the gallows stairs and picked up a scrap of blue cloth caught on a nail. Fine fabric. Expensive fabric. He held it beside the torn edge of Vernon's cuff. The match was plain enough for even the farthest eyes to see. Seems you climbed these steps before sunrise, Caleb said. Perhaps to make sure the rope was ready. Several townsfolk slowly backed away from Vernon as if guilt might stain by standing near it. Sheriff Kane looked at the paper in his hand again, then at Elena. Shame sat on him like a wet coat. Why did you not tell me about the bribe? He asked her quietly. Elena's eyes never left Vernon. Because weak ears hear only rich voices. The words landed harder than any shout. Kane lowered his gaze. Vernon tried one last smile, but it looked borrowed now. This is madness. I am a banker. I built this town. Caleb nodded. Brick by brick, debt by debt. Then he reached into his saddlebag and drew out a small iron key with a brass tag marked Bank Office. Found this in the creek crossing 2 miles east. Fresh mud still on it. Kane stared. That key opens the rear ledger room. Caleb handed it over. Then ask yourself why a respectable man threw it away before dawn. Vernon's composure finally cracked. You have no proof of murder. Caleb's voice dropped so low the crowd leaned in to hear. Maybe not yet. He turned toward Elena. But you said he asked something of you after offering money. Elena gave the slightest nod. He wanted me to swear I saw a stranger leave town. A man with a gray horse. Every eye shifted to Caleb's black horse tied near the trough. Caleb smiled faintly. Problem with lies is they need details. Too many details. Sheriff Kane stepped between Vernon and the street. For the first time that morning, he stood straight. You are not leaving. Vernon looked around for allies and found only faces that would not meet his own. Elena lifted her bound hands slightly. Sheriff, she said, calm as ever, before you judge another soul again, perhaps untie the one you nearly buried. Kane froze where he stood. And the whole town waited to see what kind of man he truly was. Some men spend years building authority, only to lose it in one silent minute. Sheriff Doyle Kane climbed the gallows steps slowly, as if each board remembered what he almost did there. The crowd parted without being asked. No one cheered now. No one called for justice. They had already learned how quickly that word can change clothes. Kane stopped in front of Elena Red Hawk and could not lift his eyes at first. Her wrists were still tied with coarse rope, but she stood straighter than any person in town. Wind moved through the square and carried the smell of dry cedar and horse leather. Caleb Mercer watched from below, saying nothing. He knew shame speaks best when no one interrupts it. Kane finally reached for the knot. His fingers trembled worse than before. I should have listened, he said quietly. Elena answered, you should have looked. The knot came loose. Rope fell from her wrists and landed on the platform with a soft sound that seemed louder than the church bell. Kane stepped back as if the space belonged to her now. She rubbed her hands once, then lowered them at her sides. No anger. No triumph. Only dignity, which can make guilty people more uncomfortable than rage ever could. Vernon Holloway saw the crowd turning and tried to recover what fear had taken from him. This proves nothing, he shouted. Untie her if you must, but I demand order. Caleb glanced his way. Funny thing about order, he said. It usually arrives after truth. Vernon pointed toward Caleb with a stiff hand. This drifter walks in with stories and scraps of paper, and you all bow to him. No one moved. A ranch hand near the trough removed his hat. Then the widow from the boarding house did the same. One by one, faces that had looked at Elena with suspicion now looked at Vernon with distance. The square had changed sides without a vote. Kane descended the steps and stood before the banker. Until this is settled, you will remain here. Vernon scoffed. You forget who holds notes on half this town. An old farmer in the back spoke up. Maybe that is why half this town stayed quiet too long. Murmurs of agreement followed. Vernon turned pale beneath his polished manner. Caleb walked to the center of the street and crouched near the dust where wagon tracks crossed like tangled rope. He traced one mark with 2 fingers. Sheriff, he said, how many wagons came through after midnight? Kane frowned. None scheduled. Caleb nodded toward the print. Fresh iron rim, narrow wheel, weighted heavy on one side. Bank transport cart. Kane stared. The cart was missing this morning. Caleb stood. Then the ledger was moved before dawn. Not stolen by a woman on foot. Elena stepped down from the platform at last. Every eye followed her boots touching the boards, then the dirt below. She walked past Vernon without a glance and stopped beside Caleb. From beneath her collar, she drew the half-silver coin and placed it in his palm. Sunlight flashed across the broken edge. "You kept your promise," she said. Caleb closed his fingers around it. "Not all of it." He looked toward the old bank at the far end of Main Street, windows dark, curtains drawn. "The rest is waiting inside that building." Vernon's breath caught so softly only those nearest heard it. Cain heard enough. He turned to two deputies who had hidden behind the crowd all morning. "With me," he said. Then he faced the town. "Nobody leaves this square." And for the first time in years, Dry Creek obeyed the law instead of money. Buildings keep secrets longer than people do, but not forever. Sheriff Doyle Cain crossed Main Street with two deputies at his heels, boots striking the boards hard enough to sound braver. Then he felt. The square watched in silence. Vernon Holloway remained where he stood, chin raised, though the color had left his face. Caleb Mercer did not look at him again. He was watching the bank windows, where curtains moved once and then went still. Elena Red Hawk stood beside the water trough, wrists free now, eyes narrowed toward the same building. "Someone is inside," she said. Caleb gave a small nod. "Someone who knows the truth." Cain reached the front door of Dry Creek Bank and found it locked. He rattled the handle, then looked back toward the crowd as if asking permission from the town he had nearly failed. Caleb called out, "Try the side office." Men hiding records rarely use the front entrance. Cain hesitated only a second before circling the building. Dust drifted through the street. Horses stamped and snorted. No one spoke above a whisper. Waiting has its own sound. Vernon finally turned toward Elena. "You could end this now," he said softly. "Say you were mistaken." She met his eyes with the calm of deep water. "I was mistaken once," she replied. "I thought fear made men quiet. I see now greed does that better." Several townsfolk lowered their heads. Caleb leaned against the hitching rail, hat brim shadowing his face. "5 years ago," Elena said without looking at him, "you were easier to find." Caleb smiled faintly. "5 years ago, I was easier to trust." She glanced at him then, and for the first time that morning, something warm touched the edge of her expression. "You still carried that coin." Caleb opened his palm. The broken silver half rested there, worn smooth by years. "A promise should fit in a pocket," he said. "That way a man has no excuse to leave it behind." Before Elena could answer, a crash sounded from behind the bank. Then hurried footsteps. One deputy shouted. The square stiffened as Cain emerged from the alley, coat flapping, guiding a thin clerk in ink-stained sleeves toward the center of town. The young man looked terrified, not of the sheriff, but of being seen. In one hand Cain carried a leather ledger. In the other, a canvas sack heavy with coins. Gasps rose from the crowd. Vernon took a step backward. Then another. "Found him in the records room," Cain called out. "Trying to climb through the rear window." The clerk shook his head wildly. "I did not steal it," he blurted. "Mr. Holloway told me to move the books before dawn. Said the old owner was retiring." Vernon snapped, "Liar." But the word sounded weak now, thin as paper. Cain opened the ledger and flipped pages spotted with fresh ink. Loans erased. Property titles transferred. Signatures copied. He looked up slowly. All dated last night. Caleb straightened from the rail. "Seems your banker was not planning for mourning," he said. "He was planning for ownership." The crowd turned fully at last. Faces once hungry for Elena's downfall now stared at Vernon with something colder than anger. Recognition. The clerk swallowed hard and pointed with a shaking hand. "There is more," he said. In the cellar vault. He made me hide something wrapped in canvas. Vernon spun toward the road. Caleb was already standing in front of him. Not reaching for a weapon. Not raising a hand. Just standing there, quiet as a locked gate. Easy now, Caleb said. Morning is almost honest. When a cornered man cannot buy escape, he starts bargaining with truth. Vernon Holloway lifted both hands slowly, palms open, smile returning in pieces. Now hold on, he said. There has been confusion. Books are moved every week. Clerks panic. Outsiders make stories. Caleb Mercer did not step aside. He only looked at Vernon the way a rancher studies rotten fence posts before replacing them. Then the cellar will clear things up, Caleb said. Sheriff Doyle Kane nodded to his deputies. Open it. Vernon's jaw tightened. You need a warrant. Kane held up the bank key taken from the creek. I need a spine. Looks like I found one. A few nervous laughs moved through the crowd. It was the first honest sound Dry Creek had made all morning. Kane led the deputies into the bank while townsfolk pressed closer, stopping just short of the porch. Elena Red Hawk remained near the hitching rail, eyes on the doorway. Caleb stood beside her, still blocking the road behind Vernon. You knew there was more hidden, Caleb said quietly. Elena answered, men who steal. Papers always hide what matters most. He glanced at her. And what matters most? She looked toward the bank. What they cannot explain. Boards creaked inside. A lantern was lit below street level. Then came scraping, muttered voices, and the thump of something heavy dragged across wood. Vernon tried to laugh again, but no one joined him. Sweat darkened the collar of his fine shirt. The clerk, still trembling, stood with the ledger clutched to his chest like a church book. I told him not to keep it there, he whispered. Caleb heard him. Keep what there? The clerk swallowed. A parcel from the owner's office. Wrapped in canvas. He said no one must see it until after the hanging. Every face in the square turned slowly toward Vernon. He stared at the ground as if searching for a price low enough to buy silence one last time. Sheriff Kane emerged carrying a long canvas bundle coated with cellar dust. One deputy followed with a metal lockbox. The other held several stamped property deeds. Kane set the bundle on a barrel in the center of town. No flourish. No speech. He untied the rope and rolled the canvas back. Inside lay the missing account books of Dry Creek Bank, signed by the old owner and marked with notes in red pencil. Next to them rested a sealed envelope addressed to Sheriff Doyle Kane. Kane blinked hard. This was hidden beneath the coal bins, he said. Vernon finally burst out, those papers mean nothing. Caleb answered, then you will not mind hearing them read. Kane opened the envelope with careful hands. The square went still enough to hear canvas settling in the wind. He read silently at first, then looked up, face drained pale. It is from Mr. Alden Pierce, he said, naming the dead owner. Written last night. He swallowed once. It states Vernon Holloway falsified loans for years, took ranch land through fraud, and threatened anyone who spoke. Murmurs rose like thunder far away. Kane continued, voice stronger now. It also says Miss Elena Red Hawk witnessed Pierce confronting Holloway in the office. Pierce feared for her safety and asked that she be protected. Elena closed her eyes for one brief second. Vernon shouted over the crowd. A dying man's rambling words. Caleb took one step forward. Maybe. Then he pointed to the lockbox. Open the rest. Kane lifted the lid. Inside were watches, wedding rings, land deeds, and folded notes from families ruined by debt. Tokens of a town bled quietly for years. No one looked at Vernon with fear anymore. They looked at him with memory. The hardest chains to break are the ones people wear willingly. Dry Creek stared at the lockbox as if it had opened a grave beneath the town square. Watches long thought lost. Wedding rings pawned under pressure. Folded deeds signed away by men who could not read the terms placed before them. Every object carried a face in someone's memory. An old ranch widow stepped forward first. She picked up a silver brooch with shaking fingers and pressed it to her chest. "My husband gave me this in '68, she whispered. No one answered. There was nothing left to say. Vernon Holloway backed away one slow step at a time. The polished confidence he wore each day had cracked beyond repair. "These were collateral," he said. "Lawful business." Caleb Mercer looked at the gathered people, not at Vernon. "Then why hide lawful business under coal?" he asked. Vernon's mouth opened, but no words came. Sheriff Doyle Kane closed the lockbox lid and faced the town. For the first time in years, his badge seemed to weigh what it should. "I failed every one of you," he said. "And I nearly failed worst of all this morning." His eyes lifted to Elena Red Hawk. She said nothing. Mercy often arrives without applause. Kane drew a long breath. "Vernon Holloway, you are under arrest for fraud, theft, and obstruction of justice." The deputies stepped forward, steadier now than when the day began. Vernon glanced left, then right, searching for someone to defend him. Men he had loaned money to looked away. Women he had patronized turned their backs. Even the clerk would not meet his eye. Power leaves a room quietly when no one feeds it. "You cannot do this," Vernon snapped. "Half this town owes me." A ranch hand near the well answered, "Not anymore." Others began reaching into pockets, saddlebags, aprons. Notes. Receipts. Loan slips. They carried them toward the barrel one by one and dropped them at Kane's feet. Paper fluttered in the wind like dry leaves. Caleb watched it happen with the faintest smile. "Looks like the debt changed owners," he said. Kane handed the papers to a deputy. "These will be reviewed fairly." Fairly. The word sounded new in Dry Creek. Elena walked to the barrel and touched the old owner's letter once before folding it carefully. "Mr. Pierce tried too late," she said. "Late is still a kind of trying," Caleb replied. She studied him. "You rode back for one promise." Caleb opened his palm and showed the half-silver coin. "A promise is enough road for one man." Elena reached beneath her collar and placed the matching half beside it. The edges met cleanly, worn by years apart. "Then keep this road," she said. "You have finished yours." Caleb looked at the joined coin, then at her. "Feels like another just started." Around them, the townsfolk began clearing the gallows platform in silence. Rope came down. Boards were unfastened. No orders were given. Shame had become labor. Kane noticed and removed his hat. "Take it all down," he said. "Today." By noon, only an empty patch of dirt remained where the platform had stood. Vernon was led toward the jail without ceremony. No one jeered. No one celebrated. Some endings do not need noise. Elena turned toward the far road where the desert opened wide and bright. Caleb moved beside her, matching pace without asking permission. "Where are you headed?" she asked. He placed the joined coin into her hand. "Depends," he said. "Where does truth go after a town finally lets it in?" By afternoon, the sun stood high over Dry Creek, and nothing looked the same except the dust. The gallows were gone. In their place lay fresh boards stacked beside the church wall, waiting to become something useful. Men who had shouted for punishment now worked with lowered eyes and quiet hands. Women carried nails in aprons. Even children swept the square where shame had stood all morning. Some towns heal only when they build over what they regret. Sheriff Doyle Kane sat at a small table outside the jail, sleeves rolled, reading every debt note taken from Vernon Holloway's office. Beside him, the old clerk copied names onto clean paper so land could be returned to rightful hands. Cain no longer barked orders. He asked questions. It was slower work, but better work usually is. Vernon watched through the barred window, face pale behind shadow. No one stopped to stare at him. Forgotten pride is a lonely punishment. Caleb Mercer tightened the saddle strap on his black horse near the trough. He worked in silence, movements practiced, unhurried. Elena Red Hawk stood a few feet away beneath the awning of the mercantile, turning the joined silver coin in her fingers. Sunlight flashed across the seam where the two halves met. "You always leave this fast?" she asked. Caleb checked the cinch once more. "I stay long enough to finish what I came for." "And what if something new begins before you ride out?" He looked up then. There was humor in her voice, but not only humor. "Then a man ought to be careful," he said. "Beginnings ask more of him than promises do." Elena smiled slightly. It changed the whole street. The widow who had reclaimed her brooch noticed and smiled too. Small kindness travels faster than gossip when given room. Cain approached with the owner's letter folded neatly in his hand. "Miss Red Hawk," he said, hat in hand, "the town owes you an apology." Elena regarded him calmly. "A town cannot speak with one mouth." Cain nodded. "Then I will speak with mine. I was wrong." She studied him for a long moment, then took the letter. "Try being right tomorrow," she said. Cain let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. "I intend to." He turned to Caleb. "You could stay. Dry Creek needs men who can see through walls." Caleb glanced toward the open desert beyond town. "Every town says that after trouble." "And what do you say?" Cain asked. Caleb settled his hat lower. "I say towns should learn to do their own seeing." Laughter, soft and genuine, rose from a few nearby workers. It felt strange in the square, but welcome. Elena stepped closer and held out the joined coin. "Take it," she said. Caleb shook his head. "It belonged to two people before today." "Then it still does." She slipped it into his coat pocket before he could answer. Her hand lingered only a second, but enough to quiet the world around them. A freight wagon rolled by. Hammers rang at the church wall. Somewhere a piano tested two uncertain notes. Life returning often sounds awkward at first. Caleb mounted his horse and looked down at her. "Which road are you taking?" he asked. Elena picked up a travel satchel resting by the post. "The one leaving this town." "North or west?" "Depends who rides too slow." Caleb's mouth moved in the nearest thing he had to a grin. He nudged the horse forward. Elena stepped into the street and matched his pace on foot for 3 strides before swinging onto the spare mare tied behind his saddle. The whole town stopped working to watch. Cain removed his hat again. No speeches followed them. No cheers. Just the sound of hooves heading toward open country, and a place called Dry Creek learning, at last, how to be quiet for the right reasons. Night came soft across the prairie, laying blue shadows over the road north of Dry Creek. Caleb Mercer and Elena Red Hawk rode side by side beneath a sky crowded with stars, the kind that make a man feel small enough to become honest. Behind them, the town lights had faded to 3 dim sparks and then to none at all. Ahead waited open land, mesquite ridges, cold streams, and whatever truth chose next. For 10 miles they rode mostly in silence. It was not an empty silence. It was the kind built from questions that do not need hurrying. Wind brushed through the grass in silver waves. Leather creaked. Hooves kept time. Elena finally spoke. "You watched from the ridge before sunrise." Caleb nodded. "I reached town in the dark." "You could have ridden in sooner." "I could have." She looked at him. "Why did you wait?" Caleb kept his eyes on the trail. "I needed to know whether Dry Creek was wicked or only asleep." And what did you learn? He considered the stars before answering. Most places are asleep until someone pays the price to wake them. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the joined silver coin. This coin was once payment for a kindness, she said. Now what is it? Caleb smiled faintly. Trouble, most likely. She laughed then, clear and brief, and the sound startled a pair of quail from the brush. They camped near a creek lined with cottonwoods. Caleb built a small fire. Elena brewed coffee black enough to stand a spoon in. Neither asked permission to stay. Some decisions become simple after surviving a morning together. She handed him a tin cup. 5 years ago, she said, I found you half frozen with a busted stirrup and no sense. I remember the stirrup. You remember only what flatters you. He accepted that with a nod. Firelight moved across her face, gentling the strength there without diminishing it. Why did you help me then? He asked. Elena looked into the flames. Because you thanked me before I finished helping. Caleb turned the cup slowly in his hands. That is all. No, she said. You looked at me like a person. Out here, that can feel expensive. The creek murmured over stones. Somewhere beyond camp, a coyote called once and then thought better of it. Caleb placed the joined coin on a flat rock between them. Keep it, he said. You earned both halves. Elena pushed it back. No. 2 halves travel better together. He met her eyes across the fire. Some roads change direction in a single glance. At dawn they saddled up and rode east toward the mountains. Near noon they reached a rise where the land opened wide behind them. Dry Creek could not be seen anymore. Only dust and distance remained. Caleb reined in. One last chance to turn back, he said. Elena shaded her eyes and studied the horizon ahead. For what? For easier company. She clicked her tongue at her mare and started downhill. Too late. Caleb followed, smiling where no one could charge him for it. Years later, people in Dry Creek still spoke of the morning a woman was nearly condemned and a cowboy returned with nothing but a promise. They said the town changed after that. Kinder in trade. Slower to judge. Quieter when rumors came. As for the 2 riders, some swore they settled near the eastern pines. Others claimed they kept moving wherever trouble mistook itself for law. Out there, stories wander. But one thing was certain. Justice did not arrive with thunder that day. It came in a low voice, dusty boots, and the courage to stand still.